Good morning, fourth grade, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about, obviously, holes again. We're pretty far into the book now, and we're going to finally meet the warden today. Now, when you think about what a warden is, if some of us have probably read some literature about or seen some shows with wardens in them. At a prison, a warden is usually like the top security guard. The warden is kind of like the manager of the prison, and so the warden in this case is kind of like the manager of the camp. She's kind of like they're kind of like the head hoss. So I want you to kind of predict what you think the warden would look like. When you think of a warden, a lot of times I think of like a big strong man that's really tough, really in charge, and just really lays down the law for you, right? So we're gonna see what the warden actually looks like today and what this person is actually like. So let's get started. Chapter 14. That night, as Stanley lay on his scratchy and smelly cot, he tried to figure out what he could have done differently, but there was nothing he could do. For once in his unlucky life, he was in the right place at the right time, and it still didn't help him. So as we remember, Stanley found that very interesting item yesterday, and he gave it to X-Ray instead. You got it? He asked X-Ray the next morning at breakfast. X-Ray looked at him with half-opened eyes behind his dirty glasses. I don't know what you're talking about, he grumbled. You know. No, I don't know, X-Ray snapped. So just leave me alone, okay? I don't want to talk to you. Stanley didn't say another word. Mr. Sir marched the boys out to the lake, chewing sunflower seeds along the way and spitting out the shells. He scraped the ground with his boot heel to mark where each boy was supposed to dig. Stanley stamped on the back of the blade of the shovel, piercing the hard, dry earth. He couldn't figure out why X-Ray had snapped at him. If he wasn't going to produce the tube, why did he make Stanley give it to him? Was he just going to keep it? The tube was gold in color, but Stanley didn't think it was real gold. The water truck came a little after sunrise. Stanley finished his last drop of water and stepped out of his hole. At this time of day, Stanley sometimes could see the distant hills or mountains on the other side of the lake. They were only visible for a short while and would soon disappear behind the haze of heat and dirt. The truck stopped and the dust cloud drifted past it. X-Ray took his place at the front of the line. Mr. Pendanski filled his canteen. Thanks, Mom, X-Ray said. He didn't mention the tube. Mr. Pendanski filled all the canteens, then climbed back into the cab of the pickup. He still had to bring water to Group E. Stanley could see them digging about 200 yards away. Mr. Pendanski, X-Ray shouted from his hole. Wait, Mr. Pendanski, I think I might have found something. The boys all followed Mr. Pendanski as he walked over to X-Ray's hole. Stanley could see the gold tube sticking out of some dirt on the end of X-Ray's shovel. Mr. Pendanski examined it and took a long look at its flat bottom. I think the warden is going to like this. Does X-Ray get the day off, said Squid. Just keep digging until someone says otherwise, Mr. Pendanski said. Then he smiled. But if I were you, Rex, I wouldn't dig too hard. Stanley watched the cloud of dust move across the lake to the cabin beneath the trees. The boys at Group E were just going to have to wait. It didn't take long for the pickup to return. Mr. Pendanski stepped out of the cab. A tall woman with red hair stepped out of the passenger side. She looked even taller than she was since Stanley was down in the hole. She wore a black cowboy hat and black cowboy boots, which were studded with turquoise stones. The sleeves on her shirt were rolled up, and her arms were covered with freckles, as was her face. She walked right up to X-Ray. This where you found it? Yes, ma'am. Your good work will be rewarded, she turned to Mr. Pendanski. Drive X-Ray back to camp. Let him take a double shower and give him some clean clothes. But first, I want to fill everyone's canteen. I just filled him a little while ago, said Mr. Pendanski. The warden stared at him. Excuse me, she said. Her voice was soft. I just filled him with Rex. Excuse me, the warden said again. Did I ask when you filled them last? No, but it's just... Excuse me. Mr. Pendanski stopped talking. The warden wiggled her finger for him to come to her. It's hot, and it's only going to get hotter, she said. Now, these fine boys have been working hard. Don't you think it might be possible that they might have taken a drink since you last filled their canteens? Mr. Pendanski said nothing. The warden turned to Stanley. Caveman, will you come here, please? Stanley was surprised she knew his name. He'd never seen her, until she stepped out of the truck. He didn't even know the warden was a woman. He nervously went toward her. Mr. Pendanski and I have been having a discussion. Have you taken a drink since Mr. Pendanski has last filled your canteen? Stanley didn't want any trouble from Mr. Pendanski. I still got plenty left, he said. Excuse me. He stopped. Yeah, I drank some. Thank you. May I see your canteen, please? Stanley handed it to her. Her fingernails were painted dark red. She gently shook the canteen, letting the water swish inside the plastic container. Do you hear the empty spaces? She asked. Yes, said Mr. Pendanski. Then fill it, she said. And next time I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it without questioning my authority. If it's too much trouble for you to fill a canteen, I'll give you a shovel. You can dig a hole and Caveman can fill your canteen. She turned back to Stanley. I don't think that would be too much trouble for you, would it? No, said Stanley. So, what will it be? She asked Mr. Pendanski. Do you want to fill the canteens or do you want to dig? I'll fill the canteens, said Mr. Pendanski. Thank you. So, as we just saw, our warden is actually a really tall and thin lady. She's got bright red hair and she kind of looks like a female cowboy. She's got the cowboy hat, the boots with the blue studs on them. So she's a really strong lady, but really petite, and she is tall and she's got red flowing hair. So probably a little bit different than what we imagined in our head when we thought about what a warden would look like to us. Chapter 15. Mr. Pendanski filled the canteens. The warden got a pitchfork out of the back of the pickup. She poked it through X-Ray's dirt pile to see if anything else might have been buried in there as well. After you drop off X-Ray, I want you to bring back 3 wheelbarrows, she said. X-Ray got in the pickup. As the truck pulled away, he leaned out the wide window and waved. 0, said the warden. I want you to take over X-Ray's hole. She seemed to know that 0 was the fastest digger. Armpit and Squid, you will keep digging where you have been, but you're each going to have a helper. Zigzag, you help Armpit. Magnet will help Squid, and Caveman, you'll work with 0. We're going to dig the dirt twice. 0 will dig it out of the hole, and Caveman will carefully shovel into a wheelbarrow. Zigzag will do the same for Armpit, and the same with Magnet and Squid. We don't want to miss anything. If either of you find something, you get the rest of the day off and a double shower. When the wheelbarrows are full, you are to dump them away from this area. We don't want any dirt piles to get in the way. The warden remained at the site for the remainder of the day, along with Mr. Pendanski and Mr. Sir, who showed up after a while. Occasionally, Mr. Sir would leave to take water to the other groups of campers, but otherwise he and the water truck stayed parked right there. The warden saw to it that nobody in Group D was ever thirsty. Stanley did it as he was told. He carefully looked through all the dirt dug up by 0 as he shoveled it into a wheelbarrow, though he knew he wouldn't find anything. It was easier than digging his own hole. When the wheelbarrow was full, he took it a good distance away before dumping it. The warden couldn't keep still. She kept walking around, looking over the boy's shoulders, sticking her pitchfork through the dirt piles. You're doing just fine, she told Stanley. After a while, she told the boys to switch places so that Stanley, Zigzag, and Magnet dug in the holes, and 0, Armpit, and Squid shoveled the excavated dirt into the wheelbarrows. After lunch, 0 took over digging again, and Stanley returned to the wheelbarrow. There's no hurry, the warden said several times. The main thing is to not miss anything. The boys dug until each hole was well over 6 feet deep and wide. Still, it was easier for 2 boys to dig a 6-foot hole than it was for 1 boy to dig a 5-foot hole. All right, that's enough for today, the warden said. I've waited this long, I can wait another day. Mr. Sir drove her back to the cabin. I wonder how she knew all our names, Stanley said as she walked back to the campground. She watches us all the time, said Zigzag. She's got hidden microphones and cameras all over the place. In the tents, in the rec room, in the shower. The shower, asked Stanley. He wondered if Zigzag was just being paranoid. The cameras are tiny, said Armpit. No bigger than the toenail on your little toe. Stanley had his doubts about that. He didn't think that they could make cameras that small. Microphones, maybe. He realized that was why X-Ray didn't want to talk to him about the gold tube at breakfast. X-Ray was afraid the warden might have been listening. One thing was certain. They weren't just digging to build character. They were definitely looking for something. And whatever they were looking for, they were looking in the wrong place. Stanley gazed out across the lake towards the spot where he had been digging yesterday, where he found the gold tube. He dug the hole into his memory. Chapter 16. As Stanley entered the rec room, he could hear X-Ray's voice from all the way across the room. See what I'm saying, X-Ray said? Am I right, or am I right? The other bodies in the room were little more than bags of flesh and bone, dumped across broken chairs and couches. X-Ray was full of life, laughing and waving his arms around as he talked. Yo, Caveman, my man, he called out. Stanley made his way across the room. Hey, slide on over, said X-Ray. Make room for the Caveman. Stanley crouched on the couch. He had looked for a hidden camera in the shower. He hadn't seen anything, and he hoped the warden hadn't either. What's the matter? Asked X-Ray. You guys tired or something? He laughed. Hey, keep it down, will you? Groaned Zigzag. I'm trying to watch TV. Stanley glanced uncertainly at Zigzag, who was staring very intently at the busted television screens. The warden greeted the boys at breakfast the next morning and went with them to the holes. 4 dug in the holes and 3 tended to the wheelbarrows. Glad you're here, X-Ray, she said to him. We need your sharp eyes. He could still see the tube in his mind. It seemed so familiar, but he just couldn't place it. He thought that it might have been the lid to a fancy gold pen. KB could have been the initials of a famous author. The only famous authors he could think of were Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare, and Mark Twain. Besides, it didn't really look like the top of a pen. By lunchtime, the warden was beginning to lose her patience. She made them eat quickly so he could get back to work. If you can't get them to work any faster, she told Mr. Sir, then you're going to have to climb down there and dig with them. After that, everyone worked faster, especially when Mr. Sir was watching them. Stanley practically ran when he pushed his wheelbarrow. Mr. Sir reminded them that they weren't Girl Scouts. They didn't quit digging until after every group had finished. Later, as Stanley sat sprawled across an understuffed chair, he tried to think of a way to tell the warden where the tube was really found, without getting himself or X-Ray in trouble. It didn't seem possible. He thought about even sneaking out at night and digging in that hole by himself. But the last thing he wanted to do after digging all day was to dig at night, too. Besides, the shovels were locked up at night, presumably so they couldn't be used as weapons. Mr. Pendanski entered the rec room. Stanley, he called as he made his way to him. His name's Caveman, said X-Ray. Stanley, said Mr. Pendanski. My name's Caveman, said Stanley. Well, I have a letter here from someone named Stanley Yelnat, said Mr. Pendanski. He turned over an envelope in his hand. It doesn't say Caveman anywhere. Thanks, Stanley said, taking it. It was from his mother. Who's it from? Squid asked. Your mother. Stanley put it in the big pocket of his pants. Aren't you going to read it to us? Asked Armpit. Give him some space, said X-Ray. If Caveman doesn't want us to read it, he doesn't have to. It's probably from his girlfriend. Stanley smiled. He read it later after the boys had gone to dinner. Dear Stanley, it was wonderful to hear from you. Your letter made me feel like one of the other moms who could afford to send their kids to summer camp. I know it's not the same, but I'm very proud of you for trying to make the best of a bad situation. Who knows? Maybe something good will come of this. Your father thinks he's close to a big breakthrough on his sneaker project. I hope so. The landlord is starting to evict us because of the odor. I feel sorry for the little old lady that lives in a shoe. They must have smelled awful. Love from both of us. What's so funny? Zero asked. It startled him. He thought Zero had gone to the dinner with others. Nothing, just something my mom wrote. What did she say? Zero asked. Nothing. Oh, sorry, said Zero. Well, see, my dad is trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers, so the apartment kind of smells bad because he's always cooking these old sneakers. So anyways, in the letter, my mom said she felt sorry for the little old lady who lived in the shoe, because it must have smelled bad in there. Zero stared blankly at him. You know, the nursery rhyme? Zero said nothing. You've heard the nursery rhyme about the little old lady who lived in a shoe? No. Stanley was amazed. How does it go? Asked Zero. Didn't you ever watch Sesame Street? Stanley asked. Zero stared blankly. Stanley headed on to dinner. He would have felt pretty silly reciting nursery rhymes at Camp Green Lake. All right. Next week we are going to read chapter 17. Have a good day, guys.